Hello, everyone. This is Espen, live from the attic for the first time going public. And I hope you can see and hear me well. I can see in the comment section that we have, a lot of people here already. So thanks for joining in. Greetings to you all from the fertile tundra of Norway, which is it's dark outside. It's 9 p.m. In the evening here in Norway. And it's pitch black outside and it's about 0 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's not too cold, but it's definitely not summer. So we're going into the Christmas holidays soon and the winter here. And big thanks to Anders Jensen, who has donated greatly already, I see. Many thanks, man. And this is supposed to be a somewhat semi-regular event where I assemble questions I've gotten on my channel for a period of time, and I've decided to go public with these Q&As. Originally, it was intended to be a Patreon perk only, having Q&A sessions live with me after each episode of my new video series, A Song is Born. But I was talking to my patrons, and we decided that everyone should be allowed to join in and be part of this community where we can share experiences and ask me questions, and I will answer as truthfully and honestly as I can. I think you're used to me being honest about things, so it's fun for me to go public for the first time here on YouTube. A new experience for me, this. So I'd be happy for comments on how you feel I'm doing and the concept of me doing it this way as I'm doing here. I only have one camera angle. I don't have any moderators or people helping out during this live stream today anyway. So I will try to pay attention to the comment section, but I see it's already happening a lot there. So I'm not sure I'll be able to, but let's see how it goes. And I don't want these live sessions to last too long either. Live sessions can tend to be a bit stale after a while, but again, let's see how it goes. And it's really up to our communication here and you guys, if this is going to be a pleasant experience or not. And please keep your questions music related. I'm not going to answer questions about private life or all kinds of other non-music stuff. I hope you understand that. We don't have that much time either. So let's keep this music related, please. And I see questions are coming in already. That's awesome. That's awesome. So what I've done is I've assembled some of the questions I've gotten in last week, and I will try to answer them in that order. And when I'm finished with the tracks questions that has come in, I will answer questions from the comment section as much as I can. So let's go. And one of the questions I've got in the last week is this one. I'll put it up on the screen. I'll take away that starting soon. We have started, of course. And Steve asked me, and this is kind of a question that takes a bit of time to answer, but I'll do this as short but to the point as I can. And I have a question pertaining to the best or easiest possible setup for a live performance where the main elements of the performance come from one synth and a backing track. And that's a very relevant question. A situation I've found myself in many times, both as an artist and as a sound engineer, mixer in a live event. And he added some more lines of words to that question as well. He has some synths, a backing track, and a vocalist, and he often finds himself in a situation where the live engineer at the event is just prioritizing the vocals and maybe the guitarist, and puts all the synths and backing tracks sort of in the background, far off in the sound field. And my answer to that, as an artist, if you can, just submix everything live on stage. If you have the possibility to do that, run all your synths, drum machines, etc., effects through a mixer on stage, and make everything ready there, and just give that feed to the front of house and let them do the mix of the guitarist, the vocalist, and your submix. If you're going to feed them 12, 16, 20 different channels, and you want that effect on that synth and that delay there and that delay there, it's not going to work very well. The front of house engineers won't be able to recognize your cheat sheet of what to do when in what song, etc. So do it all yourself if you have the opportunity to do that. I find myself in the opposite place many times. I've been the front of house engineer, the mixer, and if there comes a band, I don't know their songs, I don't know anything about what they're doing, their dynamics. It's a minefield, really, trying to mix 24 channels. Maybe you don't even get a sound check. So submix everything yourself. That's the best option, I think, for that kind of thing. David asked me, what about inserts or sends when you're mixing your songs, your music? I'm pretty sure he's referring to my video series here, because I'm building up a track from scratch. And David, insert versus sends. Well, it depends somewhat if I'm doing things only in the box, or if I'm doing things old school on an analog mixer. If I'm doing things in the box, it doesn't really matter to me. But most of the time, reverbs, delays, etc., maybe even chorus will go through auxiliary sends, so I can adjust the level of the original signal going out to those effects, like reverbs and delays. And it's like that on an analog console as well. Insert effects in the insert chain. Well, if the effect unit has a wet-dry adjustment, then it's okay to put it in the insert chain. So compressors, EQs, etc., which don't have any level adjustment, those will of course go into the insert chain. But I can also put chorus and reverbs and delays as well in the insert chain if they have wet, dry adjustments. It depends on how many auxiliary sends and insert points I have in a patch bay or on the mixer. So not an easy answer as such, this or that. It's a mix, really, between what you have available in your setup at the time. So that's that. Another one here asked me, if I'd like to do a remix contest when the video series is over, because I will release the stems on Patreon, but maybe I'll release them to the public as well. I'm not sure about the remix contest, but I was planning to release the stems of this project when it's done. So let's see how that goes. Another question I got last week, which I thought was interesting, is I've done a lot of synth reviews, and let's face it, not all people watching synth videos online knows all that much about them, and not everyone knows how to program a synth or what makes up a sound on a synth. So I thought this question here was relevant, and it goes like, how is it that the basic waveform sound still has movement to it without chorus? I think it's referring to a Alpha Juno video I did. It sounds kind of like subtle frequency sweep. Is that a result of the DCO, or is it like a hard sync kind of? And the fastest answer to that is, the waveforms themselves, unless we're talking about an analog synth that has old aging electronics that makes sound move on itself. Waveforms are static, basic, but there are ways a synth can modulate those basic waveforms to create the life or movement. And in a synth, it's usually called an LFO, low frequency oscillator, that you can use to modulate the filter or the amp, the output, or even other things as well in the synth to make a sound come alive. And you also have pulse width modulations in many synths that you can manipulate in similar ways, envelopes, etc. There are many ways you can make a sound come alive on a synth, even though the basic waveform is static. So that's that. Another question I got during the last week is an interesting one, because my last episode, the 4th episode of the series, was about 80s guitars. I laid down some guitars on the track, or I had a guitarist brought in to lay down some tracks, guitar tracks. And Michael here is wondering, what is your opinion about using synthesized guitar sounds, not real guitars or samples? Are there any that work well enough for a final mix of a song? And you know what? You don't really need a guitar to make a guitar sound on a track, in a track. It depends on what you really want that sound to do, or how authentic you want it to sound, or what type of guitar sound. If you mean strumming a guitar, that's very hard to do on a synthesizer. You can get guitar sample libraries, etc. But that was not what you were asking. You was asking about using synthesizers as guitar sounds. And I can tell you this. Jan Hammer, who did the Miami Vice series and lots of other stuff, he had a great guitar technique where he used a MXR flanger and a Memory Moog or a DX7 and a Rockman X100 headphone guitar amp from the 80s. And with those devices, he created his signature guitar sound that sounds pretty good to me. And it's all about his playing techniques and his playing style to get that guitar sound going. So I really recommend the Rockman X100 80s device for doing pretty good lead electric guitar sounds. If you listen to a track called Stay With Me Tonight by Mandy from the 80s, that was a Stock Aitken Waterman production. Ian Kernov, who did a lot of programming for Stock Aitken Waterman, he used a Rockman X100 and a Roland synth in the bridge section of that song. And that lead guitar sound there is pretty much spot on. I don't think anyone would suspect that not to be a real lead electric guitar solo. So Stay With Me Tonight by Mandy is a great example of the Rockman X100 in action. And I know this because Ian Kernov told me that himself. So that's that. I also use a Omnisphere lead guitar sound on my first album, Those Days, from 2017, on the last track, Hot Pursuit. In that track, I have a lead guitar sound, and this is all me playing that Omnisphere lead guitar sound. I think I changed it, adjusted it a little bit, but that's definitely not a real guitar as such. It's a sampled / synth guitar from Omnisphere, a rig I borrowed at the moment for doing that. I don't have Omnisphere myself. So that's that. And I got another question here before I go into the comments here and see if there's any relevant questions you'd like me to answer. And this is from a guy who shall remain nameless. And he's asking, what is the simplest way of making use of the equipment I have? He has 2 sound modules and 3 keyboard synths, and he's utterly new to MIDI and would love to start a MIDI adventure. And this is actually a question I get a lot. I think 4 or 5 times a week, actually, I get some variation of this, either on direct messages or in comments on some of my videos. And unfortunately, there's not a easy, fast answer to this. If you're totally new to MIDI and you want to connect MIDI modules or MIDI synths and start maybe MIDI sequencing and such, I suggest you you check out some more videos online on YouTube, how to set up a MIDI rig. I have videos like that myself, and I know there's a lot of other videos as well. You use MIDI cables, you hook them up, MIDI in goes to MIDI out of the synths, and that way you can use one synth to trigger the sounds of another. But to get things up smoothly, going into a sort of setup that you're comfortable with, that can make you help you make music and create and have fun, well, it's a work in progress. People like myself, growing up in the 80s with MIDI gear, we have 30 to 40 years of experience building up kit by kit or piece by piece. So for us, this is second nature. It's not that easy. I realize that. And I suggest you just check out as many videos as you can and check out how MIDI works and how to connect stuff, MIDI cables, MIDI interfaces, MIDI patch space, etc. And you'll find way to hook things up as such. And go into forums as well, Facebook MIDI forums, Gearspace, etc. if you want to, and ask your questions there, and you'll get lots of answers from people that can guide you through the setup of the gear you have. So I hope that answer, probably not the one you wanted. You wanted a direct, concrete answer, but that's pretty hard to do in a live chat as this. So do more searches online and you'll find your answers eventually. Best of luck. So that's that. So let's check out what we have here in the comments. I'll just scroll a little bit here and see. Yes, here we have one from Michael. Haven't seen you fiddle around with a Jupiter 4 or Jupiter 6 yet. And that's true. I've never shown a Jupiter 4 or Jupiter 6 on the channel. I have used both of these synths a lot. I know them pretty well. And I don't own any of them now. So unless someone shows up at my doorstep with a Jupiter 4 or Jupiter 6 for me to borrow, I don't see me doing anything with those pretty soon. I don't think I know anyone that has one in the nearby vicinity. I can't drive 6 hours to borrow a synth anymore. That's a thing for younger guys. So that's the reason for that. But I like both of these synths. All the Jupiter synths are great and in different ways. The 4 is great, the 6 is great, and the 8 is great as well. So definitely something I would like to give a good run in the studio. Yeah. Here's one from 40 Thieves. How do you feel about vintage all-in-one production units that are like DAWs, like the Yamaha AW4416 and such Akai MPCs? Well, if you talk about type of workstation type synths or desktop stuff like this, I used a lot of that in the 90s when I toured a lot and did a lot of gigs for other people, artists, as a background musicians, etc., where I assembled lots of things in a workstation and did the live gig from that. As I don't do that anymore, I have no use for it in my own work or my own musical life. But I can definitely see people using those units even today for fun or for a production. So I have nothing against it. It's just not something I'm very interested in now. Here's an interesting one: DAW versus analog compressors from Affection. Is that it? Yeah. DAW versus analog compressors. Well, whatever works, works. I'm an old dog. I like to turn knobs if I can. Turning knobs today can be quite expensive, so it's often cheaper to do that in the DAW. But I like them both. I think they have possibilities and good sound either way. So maybe a mix. I don't have a preference one over the other for a final mix. But as the final mix is only part of the equation for me, that the journey towards the final mix is very important to me. And in that case, I'd always prefer outboard stuff like analog compressors if you push me hard on the subject. But I have nothing against digital in the box DAW compressors. When it comes to EQs, I think EQs can be left to the DAW pretty much all the time. Digital DAW EQs has come a long way, and today I have some SSL EQs, actually hardware SSL EQs, but most of the time I use the EQs in the DAW. I have to admit to that. If you're coming in right now, this is a Q&A live session with me, Espen Kraft, and I'm just answering questions that people want to ask me. I'm going to do this on a semi-regular basis from now on, because I get so many questions in every week, and I simply can't answer them all in typing. So it's actually faster and easier for me to answer a lot of them with my voice in a stream like this. So if you're not bored of hearing me talk all the time, either in videos or now on live streams, I'll keep doing this. Don't know how often. I've done it a couple of weeks now, every Monday. Let's see if I'll continue with that short span between live streams. Let's see. Oh, here's one I get all the time. I'm getting this question for years. This is from Tommy Lee. And if you could take only one instrument to a desert island, it will be. And my answer is always the same on this one. I'd either take a piano, acoustic piano, or an acoustic guitar, because you don't need any power to play on them. That's a kind of a cheeky answer, but even if I had power, I would still either take a acoustic piano if I got someone else to carry it for me to that desert island, or I take the acoustic guitar. To me, those are the two most valuable instruments ever made in the world, and I would always prefer to play on either of those on a desert island. And in fact, I always use a piano to compose my songs before I start on any production. So I would not take any synth to a desert island at all. So, question regarding, question in regards to my my new album, which are on cassette, and this limited edition is almost sold out. It was sold out, but unfortunately, some people don't pay for their cassette, which I demand beforehand before I ship this out. This is a limited series of 100 cassettes. Each are numbered and signed by me, and I still have a few left if you want one. And please check out my teaser video on my YouTube channel and read the video description carefully on how to get it. It's still a couple left, so there's still time to get it on cassette. But the album will be out December 6th on the streaming platforms and Bandcamp. So it's just a little over a week before it's getting its release digitally as well. So this is the cassette I'll ship out, and there's just a few of them left. Again, check the video description for shipping rates. So let's see. I see a lot of good comments here that you love my tutorials and videos. So thank you very much for saying that to you guys. Here's another interesting question. Tal, Cherry Audio, Softube, Arturia, or Roland emulations? Would you review emulations from different manufacturers? Sure. I could review plugin synths from anyone really, and I have done a couple on my channel already. I like some of them I don't like, and I tell you if I don't like things in a video, and I tell you if I do like things in a video. The thing is that the manufacturers of both hardware synths and software synths, they've stopped contacting me as of the last year, really. I basically don't get anyone contacting me about reviewing their gear or synths anymore. There's some exceptions. So, and I think most synth manufacturers now fear me after that Roland JX08 video I did where I didn't like it at all. I don't know what you guys think. Up until that point, I got a lot of requests for reviews. I turned most of them down, admittedly, because some manufacturers wanted to have some sort of editorial say-so in the final the final edit of the videos, and some really only wanted a good review. If I told them I was going to be honest, they wouldn't let me review the thing they had going. So so when you see videos online by other YouTubers always giving good reviews to new synths or new products or new plugins, can you really trust them? Well, that's maybe not for me to say, but have that in mind. I'm always up for reviewing new stuff if I find it interesting and relevant to what I do, but I will always speak my mind about the product. So maybe that's preventing people from asking me about reviews. There are some exceptions, though. I have a little video coming up in a short while, which features a brand new product. So let's see. Is it possible to produce professional music without DAW nowadays? I think it is, but it's hard getting it out, maybe. You can do it live with a live rig or live setup. But if you have the means to install hardware, effects, and stuff like that, I think it's quite possible to produce professional music without a DAW. Yes. Oh, there's a lot of questions. Nice. Thank you. Thank you. A comment to my Rockman X100. A Rockman soloist costs half of X100 and does the job too, Espen Kraft. Just a suggestion. Of course, there are actually several different units made to do the same thing as the Rockman X100. I happen to like the Rockman X100 because it has the Rockman X100. Nothing else, even from Rockman, sounds exactly like a X100. So I will always suggest getting the Rockman X100, but I know it costs a lot today. So, but there are other solutions, definitely. I see there are some questions here that are not music related. I won't display them on the screen here because I won't answer them. But you can wonder about what you're asking. Here's a nice one from Arnaud. An emblematic keyboard of the 80s was the Keytar, and he's mentioning the Yamaha KX1. Did you ever try one? Well, I have to admit, I've never been big on Keytars myself. I never felt comfortable playing them live on stage, so I tried to stay away from that. I was more comfortable behind a big rack of or keyboard stands of synths. I was never trying to do guitar stuff with the keyboards as well. So the way of playing a guitar to emulate the way of you playing or holding the guitar was never my thing. I have a video online which where I use a guitar, and actually I would like to try a professional guitar again someday. But I don't see myself doing live gigs with it. But it's definitely a nice thing. So I have nothing against using them. Just maybe not for me in the long run as a professional artist on stage, which I don't do much anymore either way. But who knows what happens in the future? So glory to the guitar players, absolutely. And here's one that I've had quite a few times as well, from Mark New Wave here. Which of the New Wave icons has the best and most creative sounds for you? Isn't it Gary Newman? And I can definitely say it's not Gary Newman for me. I like Gary Newman, and I've listened to him a lot, and I've basically listened to him since he came on the scene. But he had never much influence on what I did. I'm definitely a more mainstream chart pop guy from the 80s, and artists that influenced me a lot more were artists like Howard Jones and the Thompson Twins and New Order and stuff like that, not the more industrial or darker synth genres. So Gary Newman, great artist and composer and pioneer, synth pioneer, but he never influenced me at all, I'd say. Boris, what would you say is the most complex synthesizer sound you've ever programmed? That's an interesting one and not easily answered. Well, let me think. The most complex synthesizer sound. Well. The Matrix 12 is a pretty complex synthesizer, and I've done some patches in the past on that. And I quite recently had another Matrix 12 in the studio, which I did a couple of videos about and used. And that is a pretty deep synthesizer, and you can really get lost in all the modulation capabilities and routing options in that one. So, without mentioning any particular patch, I'd say that the Matrix 12 is really a very complex synth that could take hours upon hours programming for a special sound if it was a complex patch. Most of the time in my musical background programming synths, it's always about making much simpler patches that would go gel nicely together in a arrangement, in a production. That's why you can't really use things like Omnisphere or those big synth libraries with layers upon layers of sound in a production, really, except for maybe the occasional guitar lead sound, which I mentioned earlier, because their sound takes up too much space in the overall mix. So to me, it's more about finding simpler sounds that go well together to create the atmosphere I'm going for. Just having a drink of water here. And here's one. What your thoughts about all these Behringer clones? I have nothing against clones as such, and I have nothing against Behringer either. To me, since I'm answering questions here, so this will be my opinions, of course. If I want to use a Roland Jupiter 8 or a Prophet 5 or whatever, a classic synth, a synth that I lusted after in the 80s, a synth I saw in magazines, the synths I dreamt about, and since I maybe even got to play and work with in the 80s, if I want to play that synth today to get some inspiration going, creativity going, I will use the original one. And if I can't use the original one, I might as well go for a plug-in version directly in the box. Using clones, to me, is not that much fun, actually. You can get close with the sound and you can get close with this and that, but it will always remind me. It's almost like that fake Rolex watch. You can get your fake Rolex watch and it'll tell time, and it'll be often beautifully made. I know, because I've studied fake watches as well, because watches is something I'm interested in. But that fake Rolex will always remind you that you're not using the real one. And for me, the journey towards the final music is just as important as the final music. So if I'm using a clone during that process, it takes away my creativity and it takes away my fun. So that's why I rather use a plug-in version of that synth instead, because then it doesn't remind me really of the hardware. So nothing against Behringer, nothing against clones as such. If you like clones, use clones. And if the final mix, the final result, the final music is the most important to you, and you don't care about if it's a clone or not, by all means, use a clone. I don't like clones because they take away my nostalgia, and as such, they take away my creativity and inspiration. That's why I don't like clones. Yeah, that should answer maybe that one as well. Are any of the Roland boutiques worth it? The Roland boutiques are clones just as much, and I've just answered that in the previous comment. So there's that. Bass guitar sounds from a synth or real bass guitar? Well, lots of classic 80s hits used synth pretending to be real bass. True by Spandau Ballet is a good example of a song that 99 people out of 100 will think is real bass, when in fact it's not real bass. It's a Chroma Rhodes, Fender Rhodes, Chroma Polaris synth. So whatever works. Sometimes a real bass is the necessary thing to use, because a real bass player will play that bass in a different way than a synth or keyboardist will play a guitar, will play a bass patch on a synth. So whatever works. I like to use both on occasion together, synth bass and real bass. Sometimes only synth bass and sometimes only a real bass. If I'm using a real bass, I'll probably have someone else coming in to play it. I have lots of real bass on earlier productions, which I've done for other artists. In fact, and here's one. In your opinion, what are the benefits of the Emax 2 over the original? To me personally, it's the sound. I think the Emax 2 sounds so late 80s and so, dare I say, Depeche-like. It has a sort of ambient sound to it that no other synth or sampler can do, not even the original Emax, which is also a fine sampler synth, which I love. But the Emax 2 is really the one I love the most of all the Emaxes. It has a certain sound that I really like. You can see it behind me here. I don't use it on everything, but occasionally I know that only the Emax 2 will give me the sound I'm after in a production or a arrangement, and that's when I hook it up. So it's just my personal favorite of the Emaxes, the Emax 2. If you could keep one synthesizer, which one would you choose? Yeah, that's a hard one. In a fire, I would ditch them all and just get out of the house with my hard drives. That's first priority after, yeah, other people. But which synthesizer I would keep? Well, hard to say. Maybe the DX7, if I to pick only one. I don't know. It's hard to say. Difficult question with a not satisfying answer, I know. Now I'm not looking at who's asking anymore, so I apologize if I'm pulling out only the same person again and again. I think I've seen Boris here before, so I'll be aware of you, Boris. Maybe I'll not answer any more of your questions in this session. But have you ever had the chance of using a Fairlight? And if so, what was your experience like? And I have. In Camden, London, many years ago, I did some work on the Fairlight. I think it was a Series 2. That's actually hard to remember right now because this was in the early 90s. But I used it and I sampled it into my Akais at the time. So I sampled a sampler, but the Fairlight is not only a sampler. You can do a lot of things with a Fairlight. And the Fairlight is iconic, and for a reason. It sounds crunchy and nice, and I just love it. And I would love to have one again. This wasn't mine, of course. I was in a studio. But I'd love to have a Fairlight, which is not going to happen anytime soon. So, but the Fairlights are iconic. Thanks, guys, for offering me to borrow your synths. I have some comments here in the comment section from people saying that they want to loan me some of their gear, and I really appreciate that. I get a lot of offers to borrow gear. Actually, I had one just before this live session started from another guy on Facebook who offered to borrow me a Oberheim 2 voice, and as much as I appreciate it, it has to be practical for me to borrow it. Like I said earlier in the live stream, I can't drive 5 or 6 hours anymore to pick up gear and borrow it. If I'm to borrow it, it have to be quite near me in driving distance. The time, the amount of time I'm to have the gear on loan also has to be generous, and I have to have some good reasons for taking the gear into to borrow it. So there's lots of synths I'd like to borrow, but if you have something to offer, please send me a direct message or an email later on, and we can discuss the terms of the borrowing, so to speak. So thank you for the offering, and please send me a direct message or email about that later. Many thanks. Here's one. Looking for a new 4-track cassette recorder. Anyone that can recommend? Well, I don't know if they make any new 4-track cassette recorders anymore. Probably not. So there has to be some of the old stuff. And there were lots of good Porta studios back in the day from Yamaha, Tascam, Fostex, you name it. So if you're looking for one locally in ads or stuff like that, just make sure it works, the mechanics works, maybe had its belts replaced and stuff like that, because those deteriorate over time. So try to check it out personally before buying it, and don't overpay. I see 4-track cassette recorders go for great big money these days, and don't overpay on that. What's your main synth people? Well, like I told you earlier, I liked the early new romantic chart pop acts like New Order, Pet Shop Boys, Depeche, Thompson Twins, Tears for Fears, Eurythmics, Human League, when they emerged again, sort of to speak, in the early 80s. And yeah, all those new wave romantics that had chords, melody, counterpoint, modulations, etc. And of course, I had took a lot of influence for sound and arrangement from Stock Aitken Waterman, controversial to some. I love the Stock Aitken Waterman back catalog, everything from Dead or Alive through Rick and Kylie and all kinds of stuff. I've never been a big one for Jean-Michel Jarre, Vangelis, Kraftwerk, all that. I never listened a lot to that in the 80s. I never took much inspiration from that either. I like the vocal-based pop acts, Erasure, Yazoo, stuff like that. So, many thanks, Sasha Bubu. I'm saying that right? Please, Espen Kraft, can you identify the synth used Pebbles Mercedes Boy, the 1988, the pad choir sound at the intro? Thank you. I'll have to look that up because I don't know the answer to that straight away. Maybe someone has the answer in the comment section already, but I'll check it out and listen to it and see if I can come up with the answer. So please send me a direct message or email so I can keep in touch with you on that question, and I will do my best to answer that. So I hope that's answers your question right now. I will try to find that out. So please send me an email or direct message, and we'll keep in touch that way. Thank you for the support, Sasha Bubu. I appreciate it. So let's see. Here's a nice, some nice comments here about my music, stirring up some emotions, etc. I won't display that on the screen here because it's kind of a personal statement. I'm not sure if you're okay with that, but my ultimate goal when making music, and I think that should be the ultimate goal for every people, and maybe it is, but my goal with making music is to touch people's hearts and stir up emotions and provide a journey where your head and heart starts moving. That's my ultimate goal. That's why I'm not that hung up on making everything 100% in tune or perfect pitch, or having, yeah, I like to pour my emotions into the things I make. So that's why I often play my synths by hand, because when I get that initial creativity just bubbling inside, I like to get those ideas down as fast as possible. And often I just turn on the synth, hook it up to the audio patch bay or audio interface, and just record it straight away, so I don't lose that first emotion of creativity flowing through my hands and fingers. So if you work too long on anything, it might start sounding stale and the inspiration is gone. So when I get feedback from people saying that my music has touched them in some profound way, I'm very happy to hear that, because that is the most satisfying feedback I can get. A feedback saying that was a great sound is nice to get, but people saying that the music touched their heart, that's awesome. In with uh, threefold, yeah. So thank you for that. Matthew here, Espen, I use smartphone app synths now for everything, and I think they're amazing. Have you also? Well, no, I don't like smartphones at all, actually, and I try to use my phone as little as possible. I do have a smartphone. I have to have a smartphone for various reasons, but I don't like them in terms of creativity. I think they kill my creativity more than anything. I don't like the small screens. I don't like the small buttons. I really don't like smartphones that much. So making music on a smartphone is not for me, but I'm an old dog. If you like smartphones, making music, and you're making great music on smartphones, you should definitely use smartphones to make your music. There's nothing wrong or right about making music. We must make music the way we feel brings out the best of us. So I don't like smartphones, but if you do, please use them, definitely. Yeah, time flies. Am I boring you here? Is it too much? Let's see. I should get a solar powered synth. Is a suggestion to that desert island synth. Well, that's an idea, of course. It says here your audio is going out of sync. I'm watching myself and I'm in sync, but if it's out of sync for you guys, I'm not really sure what I can do about it. Really, I'll have to check into that. Is everyone experiencing my audio going out of sync? Here's a non-music related question I will answer, actually. It's in reference to the football World Cup going on at the moment. Portugal or Uruguay? I know they're playing right now. I don't know the result because I'm doing this live stream, but I am actually very interested in football. I used to play football. I am a soccer or football coach for a team here locally, so I'm very much into football. And even if the World Cup in Qatar is controversial, I do watch some of the games. I have to admit to that, because I love football. But I don't cheer for either Portugal or Uruguay. Norway isn't a contender in the World Cup, so I just watched hopefully good games. That's my main goal, pun intended, for watching. Enough of that. Here's an interesting one from Burak. Can you play jazz chords, dim, sus2, sus4, augmented, dominant 7, etc. on keyboard? Do you love jazz? Greetings from Turkey. And maybe I don't love jazz as a genre, but I like a lot of jazz and I've listened to a lot of jazz. I don't play any jazz myself. I'm not big on improvising or stuff like that. I do know music theory, so I can play any chord you might want me to play. Not here on this live stream right now, but I do play, and I can play chords of all kinds and put them together, and I know the theory behind it and all that. I try not to use that theory when I make music. I think making music can be done perfectly. Good music can be done perfectly without knowing any music theory at all. But music theory can be a good thing to know for explaining things later. And if you work in a professional environment, in a professional studio, knowing music theory can often get the job done a lot more easy than if you don't know music theory, especially when you're hiring professional studio musicians, etc. So that's a topic on itself, which I'm planning to do a video on later, if you actually need to know music theory to make great music. So thank you for asking that question. Okay, I'll bite on this one. If you were on a desert island with power supply and you couldn't take any acoustic instruments with you, what synth would you have taken with you? I'll bite on that one. And I would not take a workstation. I would not have to have sequencing possibilities to make time fly. I would just pick an instrument that was easy and nice to play. That would sort of make it possible to do compositions, chords, and stuff like that. So I would probably take I'd have to have at least 61 keys, 5 octaves. So maybe a DX7, a Roland D50 perhaps, or yeah, Roland JX8P maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say. Something of that kind. So let's see. Yeah, Espen Kraft, what do you think of Electron's products like the Digitone Syntact? Well, to be totally honest, I've never used any of it. I think that's a brand and a line of products I've never used. I've seen videos about it in use and heard some of the results it can produce. And from that, I'm really not into it at all, actually. So I would never buy one of their products to try it for myself. Again, if someone dropped one on my doorstep, maybe I'd pick it up and check it out. But I really don't have any experience in using it, so I don't know actually if I'd end up liking it from videos. I don't like it, but again, sometimes videos can be deceptive. So let's see. It's lots of people here and questions. Thank you so much. We're reaching sort of my 1 hour goal of this live stream. So let's see if we can put another question or two in here. I'll take this one. What about that new Taylor Swift album? Very interesting question. I've only heard a couple of songs on that album. I do like Taylor Swift. I think she's very talented. I think she sings well. She makes a lot of good songs. She made a lot of good songs in the past. Some of my problem with Taylor Swift now is the same as with a lot of other artists, acts on the charts today. I don't like their sound very much. I don't like how songs are mixed and mastered these days. Dynamics are gone. Bass is gone. The top end is pretty horrific, if you ask me. They use too much de-essing on vocals. You can't hear S's anymore on modern chart music. And I could go on that. I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man, but I have my opinions, and luckily I can choose what I can pick out the songs I want to hear when I have any spare time. And Taylor Swift is not among the worst, like I told you, but the reasons are mostly because I don't like the sound of her records today. I do like her composing capabilities and her singing voice and lyrics, but it's mostly about the sound these days. I don't like it's piercing my ears. So let's see. If we can scroll down here, coming to and like I told you, I can't, based on the questions I see in the comment section here, I don't have the time to answer everyone. So you have to excuse me for that. Do you do live often? I do some live stuff from the studio here, but I think you mean on stage. Last time I was on stage doing something live was 5 years ago, and that was on national TV here in Norway, or one of the national broadcasters. And I used my MIDI rig, which was a demand I had for doing that live gig. I was to use live MIDI sequencing and playing on top and singing live through a vocoder of all things during that particular gig. And I liked it a lot. The technicians and people in charge of the event didn't like it as much, because it took me almost an hour to rig it up and an hour to rig it down. And the techs didn't actually know what to do with the sounds I produced. So it was kind of a bizarre experience. And that's why I turned down pretty much every offer to do something live today. I've had lots of offers to come to Germany and the States and everywhere to perform, because they've seen things in my studio or heard my music online. But I don't do live gigs with a laptop and backing tracks coming from a laptop. If I'm doing things live now, if I'm to do things live, I would have to use some part of this rig you see in my videos. Live MIDI sequencing, live playing on top, maybe with a guitarist. And first, I can't be bothered driving around anymore in a van doing this as a one-man band. And two, shipping all this out by airplane, and the shipping expenses and my fees for doing that, it's not realistic for an event hiring me to do this kind of a job. So my live days as such on stage are pretty much over, I guess. So the answer to that is no, in that sense. So let's see. And got some questions here where I'm from. I'm from Norway. I'm broadcasting or streaming live from Norway right now, in the southeast of Norway, to hours southeast of Oslo, the capital, out in the woods. And not much people here, just how I like it. My London days are over as well, where I used to be there a lot, and I like it out here in the wilderness with wolves and elks and foxes running around the house, and I can just go out and fish my own dinner if I want to. And I actually do that as well. Not during this time of year, I admit. I don't like the cold that much, but as a Norwegian, we get used to that cold. Here's an interesting one. We'll have to close this up pretty soon. But Espen, do you get MIDI problems using MIDI through on all the synths, like note drops out of sync, big latencies, etc.? And it depends. I have some videos on that on my channel. If you do daisy chain a lot of synths, always put the synths with the percussive sounds early in the MIDI daisy chain, because the latency will build up and you can experience dropouts. Those big slow pads, put those last in the chain if you're doing MIDI daisy chaining. If you're doing a MIDI patch bass, that's much better. Then you can keep the latency in check. So with careful planning, good wiring, a nice MIDI patch bay, you shouldn't experience a lot of problems with a MIDI sync system. I've actually never had any big problems with that myself. So let's see. Here Here's an interesting one I will answer before we're going to a close. Do you maintain your own synths, or do you have a dedicated tech to do it? If you do it yourself, any recommendation how to learn? Not a fast answer on that one. I have a degree in electronics from the late 80s and early 90s. I studied electronics for 3 years. So I have a good background on electronics. I have a soldering iron. I have spare parts, and I do some maintenance myself. But as I'm getting older, my eyes are starting to fail me. I don't have any good places to work on synths anymore. So if it comes to more serious matters, which requires a lot of fine soldering and the need for oscilloscopes and stuff like that to probe digital circuits, circuitry, etc. I too now put that away for others to check up on. In Oslo, there's still some good techs to do that, especially if it's analog stuff. So the answer is yes and no. I do some myself, and I could have done more if I had better eyes now and more gear and more place to work on the synths, which I don't. So I do some, and some I have to set out if serious problems occur. Yes. Good places to learn about that. Well, again, I'm from the 80s. I have a degree in electronics, searching for errors in electronics and stuff like that. I've worked in the field of electronics as well. So where to start today? I don't know. If you don't know anything about electronics, if you don't know anything about maintenance on electronics, vintage electronics, it can be dangerous to go into the hobby of collecting vintage synths, because they will require maintenance eventually, all of them. So just check around on forums, and yeah, you just have to try to learn online if you have no other option. Try to get a hold of a good tech, and maybe you can sit in on some of his repair work and see what he's doing and stuff like that. That's my advice on that. So let's see. What would you wish for to be included in the forthcoming MIDI 3.0 spec, Espen, from the audio engineer? Is that audio eng? I didn't know. I actually didn't know about the MIDI spec 3.0 at all. I thought there was a 2.0 coming up, which they've been talking about for 30 years. They actually talked about a MIDI 2.0 in 1984, I think, 1 year after the first MIDI spec. To me, it doesn't really matter. I don't care about any MIDI 2.0 or 3.0 at all. I only have vintage stuff, and the MIDI spec as it is, or were at the time, is good enough for me. And I don't plan on getting any much new stuff anyway, so I couldn't care less actually about the new MIDI implementation or MIDI specs. So I'll leave that to other people, and it doesn't really concern me at all. What do you think is the greatest movie soundtrack of all time? That's a nice one from Big Baller. Interesting. Well, there's plenty of good soundtracks, and E.T. is one. Everything by John Williams basically is great. Star Wars, of course, has some great music. A lot of horror movies has nice music. I think if I'm to take one movie soundtrack with me to that desert island, and I have powers, I can play it again and again, I think the James Horner soundtrack for Field of Dreams would come very high on that list over soundtracks I'd be happy spending the rest of my life listening to. So right now, it might change next week or in the next couple of months during these live streams. But tonight, I say Field of Dreams by James Horner, a baseball movie from 1989 with Kevin Costner. I love that movie. I love that soundtrack. And I was very sad that James Horner passed away a few years ago, because he was one of my favorite movie soundtrack composers. Someone was asking about, I don't find that comment here, but someone was asking about the joysticks here I have behind me, and those are small TV game controllers that you plug into a TV, and you can play things like Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man and Pole Position and what else? Yeah, classic arcade games in self-contained joysticks like this. I like to play video games, so that's what they are. Galaga was the game I was thinking of. Love Galaga. Galaga is not my favorite all-time arcade game, but it's one of my favorites. And here's one I have to answer. Where is it? Here it is. Did you ever trade in analog gear for shiny new digital synths in the 80s or early 90s? And I can definitely and sadly confirm that I did. Not in the 80s, but in the 90s, I traded in a lot of the things I got in the 80s for workstations, basically. I'm sorry to say, I traded in stuff like the Korg MS-20 and Roland TR-909 and what else? Yes, many other analog synths as well. I'm not that big on analog synths. Well, I like hybrid digital synths from the 80s more than 80s analog synths, because you can't make, which I'm trying to do, authentic sounding 80s chart pop synth music with analog synths only. You have to use 70% samplers or digital hybrid synths to sound authentic 80s. But some analogs have to be there as well, preferably sampled. But that's another topic. So a lot of the analog synths I had in the 80s and some drum machines as well. The TR-909 is partly analog and partly digital, by the way. If you don't know that, I traded a lot of that in for, or sold it for workstations like the Korg Trinity and stuff like that, because I felt I needed stuff like that to do my work on stage at that time. So it was the right decision then, and nobody wanted analog or the old 80s stuff in the early 90s. It was all about the digital workstations and stuff like that. So I'm not the only one that traded in, but the smart ones in hindsight were those that actually bought up all those cheaper analog stuff and selling it now, or maybe a year ago, because now prices are starting to drop on vintage stuff because of the world situation. People are holding on to money now, so vintage stuff are starting to drop in price, I think, from what I've seen. So I did trade or sell in the 90s. Unfortunately, I wish I didn't, but at that time it felt right. Okay. Q*bert is a nice classic arcade video game. Love Q*bert, by the way. Asteroids as well. Defender, yes, Defender, absolutely. So here's one from Mailstone. Do you use a real tape machine when you record? For my new album, I certainly did. I even did a pre-video about the processing I was going to use for making that album. And I, for this album here, both the digital version coming out December 6th and the cassette, it's the same recording sessions. I did use a Fostex 8-track tape recorder. I'm looking at it right now behind the camera here. Which belongs to a good friend of mine, Anders Jensen, and I recorded a lot of things onto that analog tape. and transfer that over to the DAW for further processing and mixing. So when you listen to that new album coming out in a week or so, it's a lot of analog recordings going on that. Firstly, because I wanted to do it, because I like the process of recording analog in a live pass. And two, because I think it makes some sounds sound nicer, more saturated, and it has a certain flair of its own that I really liked, which I really wanted to capture on this album, because this album is meant to be a fictional soundtrack to my favorite movie, which I will not reveal. And it's not Field of Dreams, which is my favorite movie, although that soundtrack is one of my favorites. So this album is my fictional soundtrack to my favorite movie, and it's supposed to sound like it's coming out of a VHS machine in 1983, that soundtrack in a way. So I felt I had to, and I wanted to use analog tape to record that. So let's see. Questions are pouring in, and that's nice. Normalized audio, can you play Misty? I think I've played the Misty theme in a wedding reception once. I definitely have the sheet music for it somewhere, because I used to do a lot of wedding reception music, just playing piano and electric piano, stuff like that. So I think I played Misty. I don't know it by heart now, but I think I could play it again if I had to. I hope you're not meaning right here and now on the keyboard here. That would definitely not be doable right now, but I love the theme Misty. Yeah, I'm going silent here because I'm reading so many nice and interesting questions here. But I have to cut this short now, and I'm sorry if I didn't have time to answer all of your questions. It's just too many for me to answer in this live session right now. I'd love to do it, but maybe we can pick this up at a later time. I'll answer a couple more and we'll cut this off. Espen Kraft, how do you store digital files safely? Well, that's very important, of course, to save your files. And when I'm working on a project, either my own or for a client, I'm saving all the time. I don't have autosave enabled in my DAW or whatever, but I save it, Control S, after I made the initial saving routine. And I save all the time. And every night when I close things down for the evening or take a major break, I also save that project file with all samples or audio files, etc., to another hard drive, another physical hard drive. So I have the project saved on two different locations at that point in time. And once in a while, I do that after every session until the project is finished. So I always have two different copies. And that other copy, I store that away from the house, because I do work from home, so I do everything in this house. So I store that in a different location, and I also do the occasional backup to the cloud, just to be sure. So that way, I've yet to lose anything of importance, because I always have a backup elsewhere. A routine that has stuck with me throughout the years. Always do a backup and save that backup file at another location physically, because your house can burn down or whatever. You can have burglars coming when you're not home, etc., etc. So that's a good advice, I think, which I live by. So people, thank you so much for joining in on this live stream. We're gonna end this now. You can watch this back on my channel as a broadcasted live stream, and you can of course comment on this live stream as well as any other video. And based on the friendly people here, thank you so much. I'm definitely inspired and enthusiastic about doing this again after a while, maybe even next Monday if you're up for it. I'd love to have comments if you'd like me to do this a couple of Mondays from now on, or if you think once a month is better. I'm all ears for suggestions upon that. I like to talk about things I love, which you probably understand, and I love having feedback. I love your questions. And again, so sorry that I don't have time to answer everything now at this point in time. But for being a first live stream going public, I think this was great, and I love you all. So see you next time. Cheers.